Good morning. Welcome to Make Southwest. It's our opening day of Artful Craft, and we've got Peter Randall-Page with us, who has curated the exhibition and a selection of the exhibitors. I'm going to hand over to Peter and I'll let him introduce them, and we're going to have some interesting discussions this morning. Thanks.
Good morning. We're having an early morning discussion. Well, early morning for me. I'm not really a very morning person. So anyway, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the contributors to the exhibition here. We have Andrea on your right as you're looking at the camera, and then we've got Alice, who's made these wonderful wooden pieces, and then Tavs, who's made the glass work over the other side there. Jonathan, who's done these amazing ceramics and works with digital technology. And Halima, sitting next to me, who's made these wonderful geometric, organic, beautiful things. I think I'll start off really by just telling a little anecdote of quite a few years ago now, when I was taken to look around the new Central St Martin's School of Art up behind King's Cross in London, brand new makeover of a building specifically as an art school. And I remember being shown around where the sculptors were going to be working, and they had little kind of workstations, quite small, like a little office really, with a desk and a computer and all that kind of thing. And I remember saying to the people showing me around, well, so when, how do you make sculpture in here? Maybe, I can imagine doing macrame or something, but, nothing much more than that. And they said, oh no, that's fine, because when when the student has an idea and they work out, what they want to do, what they want to make, and they order the right amount of materials and they get the right technical assistance, and they book the studio space for however long it's going to take to make the thing, and then they go and make it, with that amount of materials and with those helpers and with that amount of time. Well, of course, one can make sculpture in that way, and you can make very good sculpture in that way, but it precludes certain other aspects about making, which for me are rather important, because I think, in a way, for me, words are a pretty good way of communicating on the whole. And I think most things we want to communicate to one another, we can do very effectively in words. So from my point of view, it's only really when one runs out of words that you actually start wanting to make something, to talk about things which are kind of beyond that. And I suppose, in a way, that's very important to me. It's important that I'm actually, the decisions are made in the making process for me, very much. Not to say that one can't make very interesting work in that other way, but it does mean that it's rather kind of fixed, and you can't really change your mind very easily, because you haven't got enough materials or enough time or whatever it is. And it tends to, I think, mean that you're left making something which is inevitably a sort of illustration almost of a verbal or of an intellectual idea. And I just wondered, just to kick things off, I just wondered what everybody else thought about that. I know we all work in completely different ways, so it's my particular take on this is not perhaps what everybody else feels. I mean, I'd be interested to know what Jonathan thinks, because he's obviously working with digital technology, and and what Andrea thinks, because she's working with a very specific and unusual material of salmon skin. But anyway, maybe I could just pass the mic round just to get some thoughts on that sort of on that idea, really. Halima, do you want to say?
I'll pass it back to you. That point of process, I think, is really important. I often say that you sort of, and this is, I guess, more teaching, is that people might show you a sketchbook and they say, "Oh, this is what I want to make," and you say, "But when you actually meet the material and you're working with the material, things are going to come out of that." And also, surely the story you want to tell is something that develops over a period of time. That's the completed work. It's not just at this stage. That's a starting point. So my work is very process-based in that manner. I'm using digital code. I write my code. It's self-taught. It's very, very basic. But it's that interest in natural codes is how out in nature, and then I say that it's the same nature that is in us, there's a lot of variable going on. And if you just tweak those little variables, you make a different decision. So, my lines of code, and then they often have a randomness in it or a so-called noise quality. And so I can replay the same piece of code, but it comes out differently. And that's an illustration of just kind of how us artists like to push the edges of things, I think. And also, it's just, I think, a point of interest that we might add into the discussion is that my sense that a lot of the work in this exhibition is not about the artist's ego. It's actually delving into something about natural phenomena that is much deeper than each one of us. And I think there's a lot of pattern making going on and a lot of sort of looking very deeply at natural systems. So I think I'll pass it back to you.
Well, for me, I naturally started off with clay, but for me, working with materials and working with the limitation, I work with quite a variety of materials. And last few years, I've been working with concrete, and I think only by working with it, I know what the limitations and the possibilities are. So it's hard for me, it would have been hard to work that way, definitely, because I need to feel the material. I mean, even with stone, it took many years before I worked with stone when I came to your studio. For years, people saying, you must work with stone, you should work with stone, you'd love it. But even though you have ideas in your head, I think to be able just to experiment with material is so important to develop your thinking and your practice. So.
You guys first.
Well, I'm definitely slightly earlier on than everyone else, but at least I found with wood that you have to spend time with it to understand it. And every different tree I work with performs or wants to do a slightly different thing. And I've been finding that there has to be a balance between taming it and letting it do its own thing. And I think you can only really quite know or find that balance by spending time with it, pushing it maybe to its limits. And also, at least for me, my processes are mainly steam bending. So I'm pushing it into curves, into forms, and then I take it out of its form and let it move and do what it wants to do. And so there's a lot of time and a lot of unknown. And I think that's, for me, the most exciting part of it. So, yeah.
Amazing. So inspiring. In a way, I can totally relate. I mainly work with the material of salmon. And I feel like there's this whole theme of, we're all here trying to listen to the material. And I'm kind of reminded of this poet, Octavio Paz, where he talks about the other voice, where, when you're writing poetry, you're always, listening. You're listening to the other voice. And I think, even in making, especially when you're making with different materials, you're really trying to kind of listen to what the material is trying to present in itself. And I think through our touching, through spending time with it, for me, I spent 4 years and I still feel like there's so many more years ahead for me to understand this particular material, because in leather, when you're leatherizing or preserving the skins, you're trying to preserve it from degradation. So you're also listening to the material as you're cleaning it, and sometimes the material is really difficult to work with because it also reflects the personality of that salmon or that fish that was alive before. So it's thick and it's difficult to process. And there's some skins that are really simple to work with, and you're like, oh gosh, this is bliss. And you're like, oh, it's so easy, it's harmony. But then, when you're kind of starting to just stitch with it, to weave with it, more stories come out of that. And for me, it's gathering stories, whether it's from fishermen, from veterans, from anyone around me, and trying to express that through the material. The material does kind of create a narrative. And so, yeah, and I think just listening to the material and allowing it to speak is a very huge thing, especially in my work.
It was going to be exactly my phrase, the listening to the material. And so often I probably don't. And you might have an idea and you go, that'll work, that's great. And then you're trying to force the material into something it doesn't want to do. It's not actually when you are kind of having that feedback that it really doesn't want to do that, and you're starting to progress. So when I guess I'm really interested in tool making and tools, and I typically would set up a tool or a process, and then try and let the material do what it wants to do in that process or with that particular tool. But frequently I would predict or kind of this is what I think, and then it might not do that. So that kind of reflexive, I think is called the term, is critical. Certainly in my practice and my work. I think it's also, just to carry on maybe a bit from what Peter was talking about last night in terms of the fluidity between the boundaries of creative practice between art and craft, and I think it's a huge generalization. I think in craft at times we can also be too obsessive with the process. I'm a thrower. Actually, and I think maybe more towards the art practice, there's more of an open mind to kind of, it's we don't have, the process can be many things, or the idea becomes much more of a central to it rather than the process. So certainly working with colleagues that come from a fine art background, I've learned that kind of letting go of the process, which might hold back things in terms of in craft practice, is helpful and useful.
Well, no, that's really interesting. Actually, I think everybody sort of in their own way share this sense that there's something special and important about actually getting involved with the materials. And for me, I'm interested in this idea of sort of embodied cognition, which I mentioned, I think, last night, which is, the bit of our understanding of the world, which enables us to do things like, ride a bicycle or play a musical instrument. You can't tell somebody how to do that, or swim. You definitely have to get in the water. Nobody can teach you how to swim without getting in the water. And I think in that sense, I do feel that there's something very special and particular and important about the kind of way we can communicate the experience of being alive by making things. Now, given how, good words are at expressing things, making an object and showing it to somebody's way of communicating could be seen as a rather sort of blunt instrument. But I do think there's a particular, very specific, but very important aspect of being a human being that actually making objects and showing them to people, or making drawings or photographs or whatever, deals with. And for lack of a better way of putting it, it's the direct experience, unedited and unmitigated by the things of, inhabiting a physical body in a physical world, and just a direct expression of what that feels like, if you know what I mean. So I suppose, I think also going back to what all of you were saying in some ways, for me, the idea that there is that the work results from some sort of dialogue between the person making it and the material is pretty kind of important. And I think, most of my work, or all of my work really, is inspired and informed by a very long and very informal sort of study of natural phenomena. And I think if you look at the natural world, it seems to be in this sort of dynamic tension between a tendency for spontaneous pattern formation, which just seems to be just how the world is. And I suppose if you analyze it, that is kind of the laws of physics, really. It's just the way things fit together in our universe, which is best understood in terms of kind of geometry, really. And at the same time, that tendency for spontaneous pattern formation is mitigated by an equally ubiquitous tendency for spontaneous variation, for random variation. And in a sense, that is what the evolutionary process is. I mean, without those two elements, without the tendency for replication and pattern formation, mitigated by the equally strong tendency for random variation, no two leaves are the same, no two pebbles are the same, no two people are the same. And, if it was only replication, then there'd be stasis. Nothing would ever grow, nothing would ever change, nothing would ever evolve. And if it was just random variation, well, I can't even imagine what that would be like. But that, for me, and in my own work, I definitely try and choose ways of working. I think to begin with, I was kind of looking at things in nature and studying and copying them. And then subsequently, I've sort of tried to choose ways of working which combine something that I'm out of control of. So it might be the stone piece I've got outside there, which is, I haven't changed the overall shape of the boulder. That's a kind of given. And that's something which is a result of, countless chance events in a geological sort of timescale. And then I've imposed on it some sort of, in this case, it's a kind of pattern on the surface, which implies a kind of woven sort of thing. And that has to yield, my idea has to yield and give a little bit to the thing itself. And it's that kind of tussle, that combination. And in the same way with something like these drawings here, these ink drawings, they're done by folding paper in half in a kind of Rorschach type of way to make a sort of symmetrical ink blot. So that I'm completely out of control of that bit of it. I mean, I can be very, exacting about my sort of, there's two rules going on there. One is that the line enters and exits in the middle of a square, which is sort of imaginary square, which is the base of the thing. And the other is that it's folded to make the mirror image thing. But beyond that, I'm kind of out of control. So I often choose ways of working where I'm kind of actually slightly out of control, and trying very hard to sort of be in control. And somehow out of that sort of tussle is what's sort of interesting to me. And I also think what Jonathan was saying about, the right material for the right thing. I mean, I think we've got some wonderful examples of it in this show. I think Sarah Gillespie's wonderful prints, the Metzer, particularly of the moths, are absolutely exquisite. And there's something about that deep, velvety, infinite blackness of the Metzer that just is perfect for that sense of what moths feel like. You don't normally touch moths, but you do feel that sort of furry, dark, feeling. Anyway, so I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about any of that. Jonathan.
Sorry, Peter, there are numerous things. I think we were. I'm exhibiting some pieces I call icebergs, and I guess my interests are very much between the arts and the sciences, and I think that's what you're alluding to there. I was interested in seeing scientists using computer coding to understand, a lot of these phenomena that we're talking about. So, like birds flocking. They came up with they kind of worked through, and what could the algorithm be that these birds are using? In other words, what is the instinct that they have? And it is simple, that if the bird next to you moves slightly right, you move right. So in code, you can set this up, and then it's a bunch of pixels rather than birds. But you set it flying on the screen, and it does it, you see. So, I was thinking, okay, right. So if I take a sphere and put randomness all over it, and that's about what you were saying, you just get total spike. So if evolution was totally random, we'd just get spikes everywhere. But then I take something that is called Perlin noise, that is a form of randomness, but it's always just slightly random on what has already happened. And so those icebergs are formed with Perlin noise. So that's, mathematics. That is awfully scary, but ultimately it's a human interpretation of the natural world. And that's kind of what intrigues me, and this must be what you're using a lot of the time as well. And then you end up with a form that starts to look like melting ice, the way the Earth rose. And so you start to get that connection between, kind of the logic of how we have evolved and our innate senses, and the way the world works, that I think is something that you've been kind of working through as well. So, with the fish skins as well, where the way you construct it, the weavings and that, the actual process.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think because the material that I've chosen is from nature, and it's so wild and untamed. I don't know if you've ever been to Alaska and seen a salmon run, and it's absolutely stunning. You see all of these fish, they've transformed into this bright red, and they're just getting ready. They're getting ready to sacrifice themselves for their next generation. There's something beautiful about it. But for me, it's, I get these skins, they're waste from factories, and when I get them, the problem for me is saving them as they are, because if they're in the fridge for too long, or whatever happens, if there's a temperature change, they degrade. And so for me, it's very scientific as well when it comes to tanning, because it's about the temperature, it's about pH, it's about what quality of water you have and adjusting to all that. But when it comes to, so when you're done with the processing aspect, which is it's kind of chemistry based, when you're done with that and you go into making or weaving with the material, it is very it feels as if I'm trying to control the material, because that is how my brain works. I work in a very meticulous way, and I like to be in control. But oftentimes it's behind the scenes of the process of saving the material, and showing off that beautiful quality of the skins, that it gets out of control. And sometimes, I've lost hundreds of skins just in one day. And so what do you do with that? And so you learn to let go of the material as well. And then eventually you learn to be more patient. And then eventually you start thinking about, for me, it's like, I don't think in a mathematical way, but then I start thinking in a very deep way about sustainability, like what is sustainability? And then you realize actually we've kind of moved beyond that, and it's more of a regenerative thing. And then I start thinking a lot about wild salmon, what's going on in that situation, the ecosystem, and even the people surrounding this beautiful culture of the fish, and how they're related to it, and their stories with that. And then you start thinking, wow, how do we as designers or makers give back life, because it is a circle of life that we're in, and it's a privilege that we're able to create a dialogue and to highlight certain issues and stories. It's such a beautiful thing that we're able to be storytellers with the materials that we have at hand. And then as well, there's a responsibility on our part to actually, we have to be reflective. And I'm sure you are with your work. You start thinking about the ecosystem that we're in, especially with the pandemic as well. You start thinking of, well, how do we give, well, for me, it's how do I give this material a healthy death? What is the most healthy version of this material coming at its end of its course? How do we give back to the soil? How do we give back to the air? Or to, so that's, for me, it is scientific, it is, but at the same time, it's also very reflective in thinking how we can continue this on.
And you say something briefly about the project you told me about you're hoping to do in Northwest.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, it's still pretty early days in our discussions, but I am part of this wonderful organization called Salmon Nation. And so I have a great friend, Ian Gill. He is such a great supporter of my work, and he's such a great writer and a great thinker. Even him and his team, they're all about systems change. They're all about working with communities on the edge, particularly with the First Nations in the Pacific Northwest, and who are living in a bioregion who are kind of surviving. They survive with the salmon. So whatever is going on with the salmon, if the salmon is healthy that year, the run, then they're healthy. Because what we don't realize is that the health of the salmon also kind of affects the health of the bears, the health of the eagles, and then eventually the health of the forest. Because what happens is when the bears kind of bring in the salmon into the forest, they eat parts of it. They don't eat all of the fish. So the rest of the salmon is kind of fertilized then into the forest, the Tongass forest. And then when, there's scientists that have kind of looked at the DNA of the wood of that particular forest, it is salmon. So you see that we're all interconnected. There's that beautiful thing. And kind of bringing it back to like materials and our craft. It's, we're trying to reflect this as well, that we're all part of this, we're equal. We're not above nature or anything of that, but we're here trying to make sense of our surrounding. And I think that's kind of what we're all doing here. We're trying to make sense of where we are in this world. And it's quite beautiful with everybody's stories that are being told.
How do I follow that? Yeah. Well, I found it really exciting working with local trees and getting an understanding of where I'm living and what's growing around me. And the wood, ash trees in Scotland, wood in Scotland performs very differently or is very different as a material to wood in England. And it's definitely helped me sort of find my sense of this is where I am, this is what the area that I'm part of, and working with such local material. And
there's a lovely sense of play, I think, in what you do. I mean, I can really feel when I look at your objects, I can sense your pleasure in seeing what this stuff will do, and then what it does on its own. And that thing of playfulness, is very important, I think, for me. I just wonder whether you feel that sense of
absolutely. Yeah, it's been a real privilege to play with it the last few years, especially during the pandemic. I don't know about the rest of you, but we were talking last night, and it sounds an awful thing to say, but I've quite enjoyed the isolation of my studio, and having that really focused time to just see what the material can do, what it wants to do, what it doesn't want to do. Working with such narrow parts and steaming them, there's a huge amount of breaks. So you have to become quite patient. But I'm sure it's similar for the rest of you. But yeah, I think it's really helped working with such local material. And obviously there is, similar to what you were saying, respecting the material, the fact that with ash dieback, seeing as ash has been my main focus the last few years, there is a sense of wanting to respect the trees that are still living, and working with trees that have fallen is very important to me. It wants to be used, and I think there is a sense of responsibility to try and celebrate the material as well. So, yeah.
And I was thinking about, I mean, your beautiful glass pieces. I don't know whether you can hear what I'm. Yes, your beautiful glass pieces. I mean, the one of the things that one of the things I really love about those pieces is that you've kind of turned gravity on its head, you know, which is just a wonderful. I mean, it's the same. It's in the same spirit as you know, Fray Otto with his grid shell structures, where, you know, he actually draped a kind of net, you know, and put plaster or something on it and then inverted it. And of course, because it's formed by gravity this way, hanging, it's going to be also a very strong architectural structure when you turn it up the other way. And likewise, in a slightly different way, you know, Gaudi's Santa Familia in Barcelona, you know, in order to, he wanted the spires, as I'm sure you all know, but just in case other people don't, he wanted them to feel as if they were reaching up to the heavens. And so he sort of hung strings or something down in his workshop and poured plaster down them and allowed the plaster to drip down and just become, and then again inverted that. So they are literally sort of dripping upwards, they're reaching up for the heavens. And these, in a very gentle way, you know, you've done the same thing. You've slumped the glass, you know, over these, presumably over pins which are sticking up, and then you've inverted it. I just wondered if you've got anything to say about that.
Yeah, I guess it's coming back to listening to the material and knowing the material. And
part of the material is light.
So, yeah.
It's the light shining through the glass is what completes that piece. It's the shadows.
I mean, that's also the tricky part with glass, because you kind of, you know, any material, but you know, you've got a you know, and something, you know, I guess it's like, you know, like we want to control things, but we also like gifts from the material, that kind of and at times it can be quite frustrating you, because you presume something and then like it can really throw you, because it's, you know, you know, certainly in my mind, maybe coming from a pottery background, that like the material has a surface, and in some ways the glass does have a surface, but it doesn't, because it comes through. But you know, I've been working with glass for a while, so on and off, and initially when I started doing the pieces with the pins, or I wanted to control the glass completely or very tightly. So you had, you know, the notion of that pin tool is that you have pins very closely spaced, and I initially did that, but the glass just didn't like it. You know, the glass wants to flow and drape, and the more you try to kind of predict or force it into a form, the less beautiful it was, and the more you could actually let it do what you know wants to do in terms of gravity and weight. That's the you know, and the softening through the kiln. But I guess also coming back to some of the notions of you know, sustainability or kind of giving, you know, that cyclical. You know, obviously, you know, just like Jonathan, I guess to some degree, you know, this side of we work with materials that come out the ground, and I was at a conference with I think there was a ceramic scientist, and they were saying, you know, if and one of them were highlighting that if it isn't grown, it's been mined. And that's important to kind of consider, that we are using a resource that's been dug or processed, particularly when we're using ceramics and glass, and then to be sensitive to that situation, that, you know, we are, it is essentially a finite resource that we're dealing with, and there is a process that has led to that material coming to to our availability, and we are probably not going to give it back to that particular state, not for a very, very long time. So that kind of puts a responsibility on to what we do with it.
Clays, yeah. Yeah, my first love was clay, and then over the years I've been working and developing and playing with different materials, but I always go back to the clay. And a few years back I started a project working from different clays from different parts of the world, and collecting clays from travelling, or when people go travelling. And what I found with the clays, that each one of them has a completely different behaviour, different feel, and that kind of dictates the design or how I work with the clay. And sometimes the clay is being as dug straight from the ground, where others have been slightly processed, where some have been completely processed for sculpting with working with within the studios, and it's really beautiful and really, I suppose, challenging as well, because I think anything that challenges your practice or your thinking is always very exciting. So some clays, like a clay that I got from Pakistan, it must have cracked about 4 times before I actually got a final piece out of it. But each time I was adding other ingredients into it to stop it from cracking, certain fibres. So manipulating the material sometimes to allow it to do what you want it to do is really essential with working with different clays. But for me, the project Virtues of Unity has been both personal on the idea of belonging and looking at our differences as a human species. Like the clays from the different parts of the world, they're different kind of colours that they come as a dug from the ground, and their behaviours and their textures. And like us as a species, what unites us is more important than what's different. And the colours and the textures and the different behaviours of the clay, same like us. We only differ very slightly, and it's an exciting project, and I'm still collecting the clays to finish the complete installation, which will take another few years, I think.
But I think, sorry, before you go away, you title each one with a virtue.
Yes, yeah.
So there's almost a celebration. You might be using, energy to fire this clay, and you're mining this clay, but at least the resultant objects are a celebration about humanity, which I think is very valuable.
Yes.
Pieces, it's not just turned into some consumer item, but it's fashionable and this, that, and the other. And I think that's, within the arts and crafts, a really valuable element to it, that it is about a celebration of crafts.
Yeah, each one, each one is named after virtue, linking it back to us as a human species. That one thing that we have in common, no matter where we come from around the world, we share the same virtues of giving, caring, honesty, humanity. And so the naming the pieces in that way was really important for me. And the idea of the pattern, that pattern is a universal language, and from caveman stage has been understood by, so when people look at Virtues of Unity as installation, as it's growing, people connect to the pattern sometime more than the form or the whole installation. So for me, I really feel pattern and the way I work like you do, Peter, that people connect to that surface, that kind of design, that repeat, and slightly, organic or slightly, because some have got really precise symmetry, some are asymmetrical. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think really, I can relate so much to so much of what you're all saying, actually, I really can. I mean, the thing about, so much to say, but, the thing about materials, I mean, for me, it's kind of important that you know that the stuff I'm working with. I mean, I'm not religious in any way, although I'm sort of you know, in a way, I suppose if I am religious, it's a sort of animist kind of religion. But I don't believe that we can extrapolate from our ethical, you know, sort of guidelines, which we all have and share, although when you look at the world at the moment, it's rather difficult to keep that at the forefront of one's mind, which we have to do, you know, and I think we really do, particularly at times like this. But so I don't believe that, I believe that you know, you can't extrapolate from sort of human morality to the bigger, the universe. You know, the universe, it seems to me, is amoral, you know, and that's not a problem to me. You know, I don't find it a problem that there isn't some overarching meaning, because actually the magical thing, I think, is that one of the things that human beings can do is to breathe meaning into the world, you know. And actually, for me, using these bits of granite, which is the quintessentially dumb matter, it's just stuff. You know, it's had no you know, no human beings done anything to it. You know, it's just what it is. It's what the Earth's made of. It's what the planets are made of. And the idea of kind of breathing some sort of life and meaning, human meaning, into it, that's the magic to me. That is I don't need any more magic than that. You know, that is magic. And I think, you know, again, thinking about pattern, I mean, people often misconstrue pattern as kind of some sort of, you know, decorative, just decoration. Oh, you just got a pattern, you put a pattern on it, you know. And actually, that couldn't be further from the truth as far as I'm concerned, because pattern is absolutely fundamental to everything, from, you know, from atomic structures, molecular structures, crystalline structures, harmonics, absolutely, you know, vibrations. I mean, the more you look at sort of particle physics and things, the more you realize there isn't really anything much there except pattern and vibration, you know, just vibration, really. So, you know, that thing of pattern is absolutely fundamental. And of course, it resonates enormously with, as Halima said, you know, it resonates with us as human beings. And things like bilateral symmetry, you know, it's absolutely, you know, you make something like the Rorschach ink blot. I mean, you know, I know he's gone in and out of fashion in terms of psychoanalysis over the years, but I really think he was onto something there, because, you know, you just have to make any random shape bilaterally symmetrical, and it immediately makes a beeline for the part of our brains that deals with meaning and expression. Yeah. Yes.
We have these mirror neurons.
Yeah.
Actually, it was people doing primate studies that found this. And the story, whether it's true or not, but it's just such a nice story. The experimenter had an ape with him. So the experiment, and the ape still had, unfortunately, was wired up. I don't think it's too invasive. And the experimenter started eating a banana during a break. And then in the ape's head, the neuron started in that area where it would eat a banana. And you know, sort of, so for aesthetics, I think this is what's happening with us as viewers a lot of the time.
I don't think aesthetics finishes with human beings. I don't.
Oh, absolutely. No, I that's a big evolutionist.
Yeah.
Sorry, kind of hog it, but I've got some pieces there that I call random growth, and literally they are, you know, sort of. So I code in virtual space using a little sphere, and the sphere sort of wanders through the space, and if it goes too far, it dies, goes back to the middle, and I grow these random forms. But then I take them and then I 3D print them. It's a bit like coil building, and display them. And I don't know whether you are seeing figures in those. But those are, you know, that's what I'm looking for, is because we try and make sense, us human beings, of the world in our own image. You know, it's not surprising our gods are in our own image, really.
No, I mean, we read things into the world in equal measure to
our imagination.
You know, so we're not only just taking in information, we're actually projecting.
Yeah, sorry.
No, we're projecting our own our own subjective onto it. So we're looking for in random patterns that, and because we're so attuned to reading expression and meaning into basically the human face and the human body. I mean, we're not totally symmetrical, but more or less, some more than others. I think that just is what, it's a very simple reason why that's okay. But I mean, I think there's quite an interesting thing I heard about, they were making one of these sort of natural history programs, David Attenborough thing or something. They were studying bowerbirds, which make these little, the males make these little wonderful sort of stage sets, really, and they collect all the stuff, and and they're competing for the females, and the females come and look at the different things, and they choose the one that has the most attractive, has made the most attractive sort of stage set, artwork, basically. And the camera crew had to decide, with all these male bowerbirds making all their little stage sets all around, they had to decide they could only set up a hide to film one of them, because it was quite complicated, they had to carry all the stuff along the way. And they had to choose which bower they were going to, because some of them, the no females come at all, and others, they're queuing up. And they had to choose which of the bowers was the one that they were going to set their hide up to study. And they chose the one, presumably they thought was the most interesting and attractive. And lo and behold, this was the bower that had all the ladies queuing up. A common aesthetic experience, yeah. Anyway, I mean, just one more thing, actually, one more little, about, you were talking about the sort of computer-generated things where you introduce a randomness into it. Well, I think this is correct, but I gather that, there's wonderful murmurations of starlings that you see. Apparently, there's only 2 rules. They can generate it in a computer.
What I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's just don't be on the edge and don't bump into another bird. Anyway, yeah.
Can we start to wrap up?
Sure.
We've got a couple of questions from the viewers.
Great.
If you'd be interested. If I give you the question, anyone who wants to respond can. Something we were talking about. Yeah. I'll just come over. Speaking to the mic. So we had a question from Jess, which was, what does, on the subject you were talking about, Tavs, what does having a responsibility when using a finite resource mean? And does anyone want to respond to that question?
I don't mind saying that, and I'm sure other people would like to as well. I mean, I think from my point of view, it is, I mean, particularly with things that are dug out of the ground, as Tav said, I mean, we really, this is one of the big problems that we have. We dig things up and we burn them. And a lot of our problems come from that, from both those things. I mean, I think from my point of view, these stones that I use, yes, they have come out of the ground. They're usually found on the surface, in fact, but because they're sort of obdurate and heavy and difficult to deal with, it does give me an inbuilt, combined with the fact that I can't bear the idea of not actually resolving something and finishing it and making it, into something. I mean, it's already a thing when I start working on it. It's not a blank sheet of paper. And as I say, I'm trying to breathe some sort of meaning into it in some way. But at least I give this thing an awful lot of attention. And actually, I don't just trash it and throw it away if it doesn't work. I go on. It's a bit like, carving is one of those funny things, as Halima knows, that, you can only go forward. It's a bit like life. You can't say, I wish I hadn't done that. You've got to go forward and redeem it. And it's a one-way street, like time is a one-way street, So there is a kind of inbuilt responsibility there, I think, in some ways for me, in that particular way. I don't know if other people are going to say.
I can definitely relate to that. And I was going to say that because I'm working with such narrow parts, I try not to have any waste. And I think that's become very important to me. So if there's any breaks, trying to use those little pieces to become pins to join other bits together. And just not having any wastage. So if I take on a large piece of wood, every little tiny corner can be used. and even the dust can be used to clean something off or clean something down, or if there's a little crack, I can put the dust into the crack. Everything gets used, and I don't know whether I was thinking it's probably similar for you, that sense of wanting to try and use every part of the skin. But should I pass to you?
No, okay. Yeah, no, just, I mean, very quickly, yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. I use every little scrap that I make, because processing the material takes forever. So, I mean, I've had dislocated thumbs, all these different accidents, because it's very physical, even when you're softening the skins. I don't use any machines. I kind of use what the ancients have been using, a rock, like just kind of like grinding it over. So when you have the material, you want to save everything. So I have like little quilts that I make. I call them like little zero waste patchwork quilts, where I just stitch them up into little quilts, or I try to recreate the material, mix it in with other kind of sea-based waste material, and create new materials out of that. Even fish scales, I save all the fish scales. I save the bones, I save everything. Yeah, definitely.
I think we're getting towards the end of our slot. I mean, I think, this sort of sense of a moral duty to materials, is really, really important. I mean, and I think probably, I sense that everybody around this, this group feel that. And I think, you can extrapolate in a way from that to something which can sound a little bit sort of crass, in that I think, but I don't think it is crass at all. I think that actually there is an aesthetic element to our response to the environmental crisis. I think it's not just a matter of not destroying the rainforest because we might find some useful medicines or materials or something. Actually, it's just intrinsically good in itself. I mean, if there's anything, as a non-religious person, I mean, it is holy. It's the nearest I get to thinking of something being holy. And I think, it is an affront to our aesthetic sense when, well, in the words of Joni Mitchell, when they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. And unfortunately, this is what we're doing. We are paving paradise and putting up a parking lot, with a hotel and a boutique and a swinging hotspot, whatever the words are. But, and I think actually we should listen to our aesthetic sense in conjunction. It's not just a matter of, oh, whoops, we're going to, have trouble with global warming. Actually, it's just on a moral and aesthetic level, it's just wrong, and we've got to do something about it. I don't know.
Thank you, all of you. It's been really fascinating. Thank you. I just want to say thanks to the audience for viewing. Thanks for your questions. Come and see the exhibition. It's on until the 2nd of July. And we're open today, 11 till 5. Come down. Thank you. Bye.